good afternoon. I am Shoshana Bryan, Senior Director of the Jewish Policy Center and your host. Welcome to the first JPC webinar of 2024. And here's hoping that the secular new year brings a resolution to some of the festering and dangerous problems of 2023. On the plus side, we haven't had snow yet. We, like you, have been largely focused on the horrific Hamas attack on Israel that started the war in October, and on Israel's legitimate self-defense. But occasionally you have to raise your eyeballs. Today we're going to look at the broader war, the one that Iran has been preparing for across the Middle East, from the Houthis in the Red Sea, to Gaza, to Lebanon, to Syria, and Iraq. The war is not just against Israel, it's against the West, specifically the United States, and against people in the region who believe in freedom and security. Our guest today is Entifadh Qanbar, founder and president of the Future Foundation and the Kurdish Protection Action Committee, both nonprofits dedicated to helping those striving for a better life. But before we turn to Entifadh, I am going to introduce the JPC and our work. We were founded in 1985 to provide perspectives and analysis of foreign and domestic policies by scholars, academics, and commentators. You can find us on our website, jewishpolicycenter.org. There you can sign up for our Insight articles and our magazine In Focus Quarterly. The winter 2024 issue of In Focus is up right now. It's devoted to the awakening of the American Jewish community after the events of October 7th. The spring issue will look at Israel's ongoing battle for the security of its people. But right now, go to jewishpolicycenter.org and read The American Awakening. The JPC supports a strong American defense capability, U.S.-Israel security cooperation, and missile defense. Right now, our most important job is to support the legitimacy and security of Israel against anyone who would deny them, and more than ever, to support the Israeli government and the IDF in their defense of the people of Israel, and bringing the perpetrators of the massacres, rapes, hostage-taking, and rocket barrages to justice, if justice is to be had. At the end of this month, we will reach the 4th anniversary of our webinar series. Since January of 2020, we've covered the many sides of Israel and the U.S.-Israel relationship, the Abraham Accords, some of the many and mostly threatening sides of China and Iran, wars in Ukraine and Azerbaijan, the American defense budget and defense policy, as well as school choice and the Supreme Court. If you missed a few, you can binge watch on our website, jewishpolicycenter.org. And now our guest, a former Iraqi Air Force officer. Entifadh Qanbar's belief in freedom and self-determination put him on the wrong side of Saddam Hussein. An engineer by profession, he was imprisoned and tortured by Saddam's security services. The horror of his experiences under a ruthless dictatorship set the stage for his political career. He became a U.S. citizen in 1999, and in 2000, he opened an office of the Iraq National Congress. He acted as the liaison with the Pentagon to train free Iraqi forces in military bases in the U.S. and organized the Iraqi opposition to expose crimes and human rights violations by Saddam, as well as to promote freedom and security and democracy for the people of Iraq. In 2003, Entifadh became a liaison officer with U.S. CENTCOM during Operation Iraqi Freedom, coordinating the airlift of free Iraqi army troops from Kurdistan to southern Iraq. After the war, he contributed to the writing of the Transitional Authority Law and the National Constitution of Iraq. He then became spokesman and national security advisor on U.S. Iraqi affairs to Iraq's deputy prime minister. After serving as deputy military attaché at the Iraqi embassy in Washington, Entifadh became senior national security advisor of the Iraqi parliament in Baghdad. It was a short-lived job. He left Iraq again after IRGC-affiliated militias threatened his family. Entifadh has appeared before Congress and spoken at most of the major think tanks in Washington, as well as at the U.S. Marine Association and Chatham House in London. He's appeared in the media everywhere you think he should, and more than that. And today he is with us, and we are really happy to have him. Entifadh Qanbar, the floor is yours.
Thank you for this great introduction, Shoshana, and thank you for inviting me. I will dive into the subject. I think the major problem started in 2011 when the Obama administration insisted on total withdrawal of U.S. troops, despite there was a possibility for leaving a sizable number of troops in Iraq. I can tell you, because I worked in the Iraqi Ministry of Defense and I served in the Iraqi Army, I have many senior people in the Ministry of Defense. In 2011, they sent me an internal confidential report, very long report, written by the Ministry of Defense then, saying the Iraqi army readiness after the withdrawal is only 25%, which means 75% the Iraqi army was not ready. The Americans were aware of that, despite that there was a withdrawal. When people talk about the mayhem we saw in Afghanistan withdrawal, and they ask me if something similar may happen to Iraq, they miss the point that this already has happened in Iraq 2011. And by the way, General Austin was in charge of this withdrawal, and President Biden was the vice president who also signed up on this withdrawal. Total unconditional withdrawal for absolutely no benefit to the United States. Therefore, I think the policy has been the dismantling of the national security interests of the United States for reasons I honestly could not ever understand. The national security of the United States and the influence of the United States in Iraq has been not a subject of interest to the US government. Both Republicans and Democrats, but more Democrats to a larger extent. And to that, I would always say the United States should be bound by two things. First, national security of the United States, what's most interest for the United States is what's right. And the second thing, if the United States is truly seeking stability in Iraq, the United States should hold Iraqi officials to their own constitution. That it was, it's probably one of the most important documents has been produced, and one of the best and the important U.S. achievements to have Iraqi constitution written by Iraqis and ratified directly by referendum of the Iraqi people, even ratified by the Marja'iyya, the clergy in Najaf. So this constitution should become the Bible of the U.S. administration, how to deal with Iraqi officials internally or in terms of stability. And the second condition would be, as I said, the national security of the United States. Both these factors has been completely neglected. Prime Minister Maliki violated the constitution, attacked peaceful Sunni demonstrators early on, brought in all types of Iran proxy groups, which are all in violation of the constitution, and the United States were supporting him unconditionally. The unconditionally, I mean, there was no regard of U.S. national security and what is good for the U.S. In the mind of U.S. bureaucrats, stability for Iraq is by enforcing or empowering a strong man in Baghdad. They have missed the point that between 1921, when the Iraq incepted by colonial power Britain, until 2003, Iraq was never a stable country because of a strong man and a central Baghdad. And the reason Baghdad, Iraq failed miserably, we have between 1921 until 2003, 9 bloody coups d'etats and 6 to 7 major wars, including 3 against Israel, and not to mention the internal killing and wars against the Kurds and Kurdistan. So this is not a definition of a stable country. And despite that, U.S. bureaucrats are addicted to the idea that central Baghdad, a strong Baghdad, will solve the problem, despite 80 years of failure. And what has happened that? What was the lead? What was the lead to that? There was the lead to the erosion of federalism. We put federalism in the Constitution not as a title or as something secondary. We put federalism as the last solution for a stable Iraq, if there will be Iraq, if there will exist any Iraq in the future. And we use the Kurdish region example as a model for the rest of Iraq. We even gave in the Constitution the right for every governorate to transform to a region, or semi-independent region like Kurdistan. But both the Iranians and the Iranians conspired against Constitution from day one, and the U.S. have not taken the Constitution in any consideration in holding Iraqi officials accountable, despite the U.S. has participated mainly in passing in this Constitution through consultation with U.S. experts and politicians, to U.S. soldiers protecting the referendum which passed by the Iraqi people. And the second thing, absolutely, there was no consideration again for U.S. national security interests. What would Maliki provide the United States in terms of security, national security? Nothing. But you have people obsessed with supporting him, and that has this addiction on Iraq, on having Baghdad a strong center for power, continued. Every prime minister will come, the United States will support him unconditionally. Guess what? The Iranians figured that. So the Iranians start passing their demands through this prime minister. And the U.S. embassy becomes a rubber stamp to whatever this prime minister would do, regardless it was in the interest of the United States or against the interest of the United States. And guess what? Most of the times was against the interest of the United States. A violation of the Constitution was let go. And which is more devastating also, every prime minister comes to Baghdad, inherits the chauvinistic culture against the Kurds, which is a culture has basically became an epidemic in Baghdad. And for him to prove himself a strong man, he has to go against the Kurds. And guess where the United States stands with the new wannabe dictator against the Kurds. So they send the U.S. embassy will go to the Kurds and ask them for concessions. And every cycle of a prime ministership, there's more concessions demanded by the U.S. administrations to the Kurds at the expense to create a powerful man in Baghdad. And this powerful man, Baghdad, turned to be a paper tiger after a while, an Iranian stooge, and or corrupt, or both. And that's how we saw the erosion of the Kurdistan regional powers, little by little, which is all in violation of the Constitution, moreover, in violation of U.S. national security interests. Because why? The Kurds are the only real allies to the United States in Iraq. You would think the United States would stand with the Kurds no matter what, because they are allies, because U.S. soldiers' backs are protected in Kurdistan. And that's the only place where 0 U.S. soldiers killed versus 4,000 U.S. soldiers killed in the rest of Iraq. But the U.S. administrations, especially the Biden administration and the Obama administration, stood with Baghdad against Kurdistan. I give you one dramatic, scary example. In 2017, the Kurdistan region called for a referendum on independence. It's not independence, it's a referendum. President Masoud Barzani wanted to leave in history his legacy of passing this independence referendum. It's yes or no, you want independence. There's not one concrete step towards independence. The whole world stood against the Kurds. The Iranian Qasem Soleimani personally threatened the Kurds. Guess what? The United States also threatened the Kurds. We, the United States, the callers for freedom, independence, self-determination, everything enshrined in our culture, in our constitution, tell the Kurds you cannot have a referendum for independence. How un-American is that? Not only that, because the Kurds and President Masoud Barzani rightly insisted on this referendum, the United States allow Qasem Soleimani to go to inside Kirkuk, the oil-rich city, run an operation by the militias, by the Iranian proxy militias in Iraq, the Shia militias, to invade Kirkuk using American M1 tanks, American-made tanks, to invade Kirkuk and kill the Kurdish Peshmerga, the allies of the United States. Why? Because the State Department and the White House, who I don't know who else, wants to see a stable Iraq and a central strong government. That was during the Prime Minister Abadi. When I told some of my friends and colleagues in Washington, Qasem Soleimani was inside Kirkuk running the operation to invade Kirkuk. Guys, this is not a fight between Baghdad and Erbil. This is a fight between Erbil and Tehran. And Baghdad is a satellite for Tehran. Many people did not believe me. They thought I was exaggerating. Then the investigation led to the fact that, yes, Qasem Soleimani was inside Kirkuk, running the invasion of Kirkuk by Shia militias, works for him directly, against the Kurds, who are the freedom fighters who supported the Americans, who are the best allies outside NATO, I would say, in the region with the United States, besides Israel. So this is how I would like to call it, the dismantling of the US national security at the expense of the so-called stability. But this has led to one thing: no stability, because you cannot create stability on false premises, and you cannot create stability on the premises of dismantling the US national security. And I think that was one of the major problems in Iraq. When Vice President Biden went to Iraq to negotiate withdrawal, the Iraqi Shia establishment, led by Nour al-Maliki, Prime Minister Nour al-Maliki, was raising the bar on behalf of Iran, withdrawal to the last soldiers. But internally, they were accepting 50, 60,000 soldiers. The US voluntarily pulled out all soldiers without any regard, leaving thousands of vehicles and military equipment behind, just like what happened in Afghanistan. But as Shoshana told me before this meeting today, people didn't pay attention to it. There was not enough press to cover it. And what has led after that, you have to know. About approximately, there's no exact polling or numbers, but there's, according to many internal reports, approximately 20,000 Iraqi citizens were killed by the Shia militias or by Iran, who were accused of working with the Americans. I have met some sheikhs from Qanbar. Those sheikhs were against the United States, fought the United States. Then General Petraeus, with his genius plan, was able to bring them in, form them into the awakening against ISIS, against Al-Qaeda. Then there was no ISIS. And they became a strong ally of the United States. One of the sheikhs came to me and said, Entifadh, I'm calling the guy, the American guy who was in touch with me, his phone is turned off. They didn't even send them an email or write them a note telling them we abandoned you. They were abandoned, and they were picked up very easily by the Shia militias first to be killed. And guess how ISIS was created? After the 2011 withdrawal, there was a massive escape from Iraqi prisons, Abu Ghraib prison and others, of Al-Qaeda operatives. This massive escape was organized and coordinated by the Iraqi government. And I tell you why. Iran had a plan of the massive overhaul in Iraq to do a conversion of Iraq from a Sunni in the Sunni areas, and they wanted to use ISIS or any extremist organization formed in the Sunni areas, and they created all the conditions for this to happen, so they can go after the Sunnis and obliterate them. And I predicted that in 2017 in my interviews and talking to my American friends, this is what's going to happen. And I give you one real example. On the day when Mosul was invaded by ISIS, it was invaded without any resistance. Why? Because Prime Minister Nour al-Maliki basically gave the orders to the Iraqi army, 70,000 Iraqi troops in Mosul, to step down and not resist. And because he had a plan with Qasem Soleimani behind him, that after that they can accuse the people of Mosul and the Sunnis of collaborating with ISIS, and they can go after them and obliterate them. And this is exactly what happened. And the day was when Mosul fell down, I was in Beirut. I called Dr. Ahmed Chalabi, and I told him, Dr. Ahmed Chalabi, since we were young, we were told about something called Nakba, which is the 5th of June, taking over of Sinai and Golan Heights by Israel. And that was a sad day in our schools. We have in Iraq our Nakba now, which is the fall of Mosul. And he said, yes, Entifadh, I agree with you. But you know what? Qasem Soleimani was in my house he just left few minutes ago. And I was surprised for Ahmed Chalabi talking to me on an open line from Beirut, which is very dangerous. And apparently he couldn't hold his feelings. He said, Qasem Soleimani had lunch in my house. And after lunch, he asked me if I could stay and take a nap, because he was waiting for the Marji'iyya Najaf to issue an edict, a fatwa, to form the Iraqi Popular Mobilization Forces, the PMF. So the whole thing was preempted. Qasem Soleimani knew the Marji'iyya that is going to issue a fatwa or edict asking Iraqi young people to volunteer against ISIS, and he was preparing already the structure and the material to form a new IRGC, but this time the I stands for Iraq, the Iraqi Revolutionary Islamic Guard. And that's how they formed the Popular Mobilization Forces. By the way, the Sistani edict or the fatwa did not mention to form the PMF. It only said for the Iraqi young men and women to volunteer fighting ISIS. But the Iranians took it all the way to the most extreme and formed the PMF. Guess what? If you think the PMF was formed, then we have to know that the Iraqi constitution, Article 9B, prohibits forming any militia outside the army. So the PMF is completely unconstitutional. You would think a US official from the US Embassy or State Department will tell the Iraqi government, hey, you're forming a militia against your own constitution. No, the US government blessed it, not only blessed it, they say in their the State Department spokesman, they will answer the question by saying that was formed by a law by the Iraqi parliament. But every law by the Iraqi parliament in contradiction with the constitution should be obsolete. And you would think the United States will hold this. Specifically, this PMF is very likely is going to be an enemy of the United States. So here what I give you a live example, how there was a preemptive attempt to create ISIS, to make ISIS a monster, go after the Sunnis and obliterate them, as they have been obliterated now, then form a militia at the same model like the IRGC in Iran, and the United States has no stance in any of that. It's the opposite. The United States stands with those militias or stay silent or give a green light for those militias to invade Kirkuk, one of the wealthiest, rich oil cities in the world, and also controlled by the United States allies, the Kurds. So that's a very minor example. The problem also, there is very lack of understanding in Washington of the extent of the Iranian thinking about the Middle East. For example, Shoshana mentioned in her introduction the war between Armenia and Azerbaijan. I watched Vivek Ramaswamy, the presidential candidate, and he was standing against Azerbaijan because he is accusing Azerbaijan for demolishing churches in Armenia. No one understands why Iran, the Shia Muslim, stands with Armenia, the Christians, and why Israel standing with the Azerbaijan, the Muslims. They are also Shia, by the way. Azerbaijan is mostly Shia. The reason why, because Iran made a deal with Armenia. So look at if you look at the map, this is the answer is 2,000 miles away. In Lebanon, the Armenians will vote en masse for Hezbollah. So the deal is to support Armenia. So they give Hezbollah the niche they could control and obstruct any government. So the Armenians play in minority in Lebanon, play a huge role in making Hezbollah more lethal in the parliament, in the Lebanese politics. And the answer is in the Armenian Azerbaijani war. You have to have this kind of mentality as a U.S. national security official to understand the lethality of Iran. But if you deal with things on an issue of complete lack of understanding of the history of Iraq, complete lack of understanding of what the definition of stability, and this complete disregard for U.S. national security, then you have what we have, mayhem today. Now, there's also this conventional wisdom that the Middle East is divided between Shia and Sunnis, and the Shia fight the Sunnis. But really, the Middle East is divided between those who are anti-America and those who are either neutral or pro-America, anti-Israel or neutral or pro-Israel. Look at Hamas. It's a Sunni Muslim Brotherhood organization, which despises the Shia. Some of my friends in college, they were from, I was in Georgia Tech, they were from Gaza. They were telling me when Hamas wants to shame Islamic Jihad, they call them Shia, Shia, Shia. So this is how Hamas are anti-Shia, because Islamic Jihad then. But guess what? Iran was able to court Hamas and bring them in and open their office in Tehran. And now Hamas is integral of the axis of evil, of the muqawma, the resistance against the axis of goodness. So the way I look at Israel, the way Israel is a front, is a forward front, like in the military, like forward base to fight terrorism. The United States must support Israel, because if Israel, God forbid, loses this fight, the terror will come to the United States. This is not an issue of judgment. This is an issue of death or life. So you have Kurdistan, you have Israel, you have Saudi Arabia, you have the Gulf. All this are front against Iran. We have to work every way possible to empower this front, to unite it, to give it more meaning against Iran. Because Iran have their own front and they are forming very well. And they are obsessed and they're doing much better. Many people tell me the Iranians are smart. I honestly don't think the Iranians are as smart as much as the Americans are not taking national security interest into their account as a first priority. Thank you.
Entifadh, thank you for moving backwards to move forward. So let me start with a strange question. In the Iran-Iraq war, the United States supported Saddam. And then sometime later, we decided we needed to get rid of him. But in getting rid of Saddam, did we open the door to Iran? Was it a mistake to take him out? Because it seems that Iran used Iraq as a mechanism to get farther into the region and then expanded to Syria and other places. Did we make a mistake?
Well, I'll tell you one thing. I served 5 years of my life in the Iraq-Iran war. And I was taken to the front line, and a couple bombs fell, Iranian bombs fall very close to my bunker. This is a war which I have lost 4 of my closest cousins in. 250,000 Iraqis estimated killed, and probably double the number from Iran. This conception of that Saddam is against Iran is wrong, because that was until 1990. After 1990 war and the invasion of Kuwait, when Saddam handed all the Iraqi Air Force airplanes to Iran, Saddam became an ally of Iran. So by 2003, Iran has penetrated Iraq completely, and there was a massive coordination on intelligence and oil smuggling by Iraq through Iran, between Saddam and Rafsanjani, to be more specific. People miss this point. People like to take a spot in history in the 80s where Saddam was anti-Iran. But after 1991, Saddam was completely in the same alliance with Iran. And the alliance, as I said in my about Hamas and Iran, people find ways to ally against the United States, no matter how much they hate each other. And so Saddam tortured me, caused the killing of 4 of my cousins. Numerous of my friends were executed. I cannot say it was a mistake, he was taken out. But I don't think, if Saddam has died, if he tripped or died, or he had a heart attack, we're not going to see Iranian invasion of Iraq the way we see now, because there was no man could fill his shoes by all means. So I think the removal of Saddam was one of the best projects the United States got involved in my opinion. But any good project, if you mismanage it, even if you're building a children's hospital, if you mismanage it, becomes a disaster. But the way it was mismanaged, I describe it in a funny way. I said, if they gather the best experts how to screw something out, they cannot get better results than what the United States did in Iraq, as I said.
So then you see, and thank you for taking us back even farther in this picture, because if we're looking at American policy, it needs to be grounded in the farthest back piece of information we have. So thank you for that. But now you have Iran in Iraq, very well twisted into the economics, the defense, and all of those other parts of Iraq. Also in Syria, also in Lebanon, also among the Houthis in Yemen. And we know they're there, and we know they're making money, and we know they're ordering things. But how far do they go in making policy for those other organizations or other countries? In other words, did Iran give Hamas orders to attack Israel? Does it give Hezbollah orders? Or is it just there to do the funding and the background work and letting other people take the lead?
Roshan, I attended the Shia coalition meetings for about 20 years. And I used to see them in these meetings. That was before 2003 when they were opposition, and after 2003 when they all were in the government. And I used to sit in these meetings and I listened to them. They will meet, they will make decisions, and then at the end of the meeting, they will say, let's see what the Hajji says. Who's the Hajji? Qasem Soleimani. Those people, the Islamists in Iraq, the Islamists in Lebanon, the Shia Islamists, they don't consider Iran as a separate country. They consider themselves a continuation of Iran. But Iraqi patriotism has no existence in their book, because they think themselves they are part. That's why, believe it or not, they don't call it Iran. They call it the Islamic Republic, without mentioning the word Iran, because the Islamic Republic means it will include Iraq, Lebanon, Yemen. And that's how they look at it. So to tell me they will do anything without permission, step by step, they are micromanaged by Iran by their own choice, not to mention Iran could practice some coercion against them, like against what they did against Muqtada Sadr or others, or Muhammad Baqir al-Hakim, which I believe they killed him. But they could practice and do some examples once in a while to kill someone of them, to give an example, like a mafia boss. But those people are voluntarily, micromanaged by Iran. And they are not going to do it. And they know if they don't consult with Iran and take permissions, it's very likely they're going to have some IED under their car when they leave the meeting. So Qasem Soleimani, when he used to meet with Iraqi politicians, I kid you not, he has in his trunk of his car IEDs and bushels of dollars. He will dangle the bushel of dollars to this politician, make a deal with him, and tell him right in his face, if you don't comply with what we have agreed upon, and they video him, by the way, and they keep this video as a secret. If you don't comply, you will be killed. And he is going to be killed if he doesn't comply. This is how the Iranians function. Versus United States basically has no functional national security policy in the Middle East.
Okay, we're going to get to the United States in a minute, but I would suggest to you that in each of those places, there is popular discontent. We've seen it in Iran, where people have attempted to make their displeasure known, and a lot of them have been killed or imprisoned. But also there is unhappiness in Iraq, in Syria, in Lebanon, with Iran's presence. Do you have any hope that any of those can overthrow Iran or overthrow Iranian influence in any of those countries?
Well, I tell you what, the Iranian strategy, they work on the environment of the Shia populace in any country. They take advantage of it, they organize it, and they use the fear mongle of the Sunni threat, the Wahhabi threat, the ISIS threat. That has worked in Iraq specifically until the end of ISIS. After the end of ISIS, the Shia populace found no reason those militias are still controlling them. So the vast majority of the young Shia, or the vast majority of the Shia period, found themselves living in cities completely run down. There's no sewage, there's no schools, there's no services, there's white corruption, there is arrest and killing and torture by those militias, while there's no more a fear mongle they can use those Shia militias to give them the incentive to side by them. And that's how the 2019 uprising or revolution happened in Iraq. If you look at it, if you look at the ages of those people, the millennials, basically, they were all products of the after 2003 fall of Saddam, because they were exposed to internet, exposed to freedom, exposed to Americans, and they saw they learned they can rise and no one can kill them, unlike under Saddam before 2003. So that's another. If there wasn't for the fall of Saddam, we wouldn't see the 2019 revolution, which led to successfully depose one of the most notorious Iranian proxies in Iraq, Prime Minister Adel Abdel Mahdi, and brought relatively, we should say, a pro-American prime minister on the nose of the militias, despite the militias and Qasem Soleimani and al-Muhandis were leading the killing of the young kids, which 800 of them were killed. But again, the US stands, other than Trump's great decision to kill Qasem Soleimani and Abu Mahdi al-Muhandis, which undeniably one of the best decisions made by the US since the Islamic Revolution in Iran. Other than that, the US has not supported this populist movement. And again, stood by every Iraqi government against those people, against the Kurds, against anybody who is a potential ally of the United States. The chanting of those revolutionaries, of demonstrators, was against Iran 100%. After the first 6 months, it started to become against Iran and the United States. And that shows you how they felt they were abandoned.
So my next question was going to be about Qasem Soleimani, and clearly that was a good thing for mankind. But outside of that, and the other thing that President Trump did was control the money and keep a lot of money out of Iran's hands. Both of those, that policy's been reversed by President Biden, who has been allowing Iran to access an awful lot of money and give them oil waivers for selling to China. What should we do? What things could the United States government do that would help, first of all, our position in the region, but secondly, work to constrain the mullahs of Iran? What's
Well, this is what I'm saying. Like, for example, the United States tell the Prime Minister of Iraq, we will support you, but this support should not come at free, as is happening now. You have to, I think the sanctions that President Trump made were absolutely fantastic. The killing of Qasem Soleimani and Abu Mahdi al-Muhandis, after the killing, all the militia leaders in Iraq abandoned their cell phones and they went in hiding. And Iraq became very quiet from any trouble after that. It's a very good example that you cannot win the war of terrorism unless you terrorize the terrorists, not appease them. Then Biden's administration lifting the sanctions or being loose on the sanctions in Iran, allowing Iran to pump 3 million barrels a day and allowing the money to go back into circulation. Well, guess what? Terrorism is funded by money. Believe me, money has much more influence in the Middle East than any ideology or any religion. Why Qatar is gaining a lot of track in the Middle East? Because they spend a lot of money. The Iranians are very generous. You go to them, you make a deal with them, they fund you. The United States fund nothing. Or even if they fund you, the United States, they cut you off all of a sudden. You don't know why. They leave you middle of the road because some administration change, some official changes. There's no consistency. So this is exactly what I'm trying to say. I mean, as a great country as the United States, we cannot continue this policy of no regard for our national security in the Middle East. We cannot. I never was able to understand what's the gain of the Biden administration from relaxing Iran, from giving Iran a green light to attack the Kurds, for example, through Baghdad. Believe it or not, in 2021, I went to Kurdistan and I met with Prime Minister Masroor Barzani, President Nachirvan Barzani, and the great Masoud Barzani, the former president and the head of the Kurdistan Democratic Party. And you're not going to believe what I told them. I told them the Biden administration is going, buckle up. I told them, buckle up. The Biden administration is going to throw you under the bus. They said, why? I said, I have experience. I saw how Clinton in 1998 wanted to make a deal with Saddam, sent Kofi Annan to Baghdad. I saw how Obama opened the door for the militias and pulled the troops back. By the way, Obama made another huge, colossal mistake in Iraq, delaying the support to the Iraq government to fight ISIS, which opened the door wide open for Qasem Soleimani to bring weapons to Iraq. Imagine, Qasem Soleimani brought weapons and ammunition to Iraq, and Iraq paid him back $600 million in checks and $20 million each. But they took the full credit for fighting ISIS, versus the delay of the Obama administration held the United States back in this fight. So this is the kind of things. What are we doing? Why are we doing this? Why Obama is doing this? What are our end results? That's exactly what we need to think about.
End results. You also said something interesting, that in order to win a war against terrorists, you have to terrorize the terrorists. Now, it's been true. It seems to me, yes. It's also true that certain things have blown up in Iran recently. Some things blow up in Syria periodically, not so much in Iraq. We're fairly sure, although they don't take credit for it, we're fairly sure that the Israelis are doing the blowing up. Would it be helpful if the United States took a page out of that book and made it clear to Iran that certain things they cannot have? That if you or to the Houthis for that matter. The Houthis are sending missiles toward American ships. President Trump took out an airfield from which Bashar Assad launched chemical weapons against his own people. Would it be useful for the United States to take out certain military capabilities of the Houthis, of the Iranians, of the Syrians?
Listen, everything you tell me, I'm going to give you a life example. I lived through it. In Iraq, there was a time the Mahdi army was bombarding the green zone, the U.S. embassy day and night. It was a very difficult time, and the Americans in Baghdad, the U.S. ambassador in Baghdad, were asking for some sort of reduction in this bombardment. Some Shia leaders were asked to be mediate in that. Guess what they did? They didn't call Muqtada Sadr, which was the leader of Mahdi army. They called Qasem Soleimani. And the bombardment stopped. He gave them 48 hours. So those people are micromanaged by remote control from Iran. We used to have a joke in Iraq when I was young that when the communists in Iraq will carry on their umbrellas if it rains in Moscow. So the same thing for those people. It's exactly the same thing. Whatever Tehran decides, they will do immediately without any delay. So I kept telling them, if you know that Qasem Soleimani is behind these attacks, instead of sending U.S. helicopters attacking Sadr city, where the source of these bombs coming from, you should probably send these helicopters and bomb targets inside Iran. And I guarantee you they will stop. Now, today I saw in the news that Khamenei told his people, de-escalate with the United States. We don't want direct confrontation. They know they cannot win with Iran, with the United States, so they use proxies. But we have to understand, what is the address? The address is in Tehran.
It is, yes. I don't know that the Biden administration would like to think about that, but yes. We had a question from someone who's listening who asked, are all of these small wars or smaller wars or proxy wars, are they a way to provide cover for Iran as it creates its nuclear program? So if people are worried about the Hamas war, people are worried about Iraq, or they're worried about Lebanon at the moment, does that take attention away from what Iran is doing on the nuclear side of its thought process?
The Iranians created the art of using terrorism for political aims. Before, anciently, I mean, terrorism was for the sake of terrorism. The Iranians do terrorism for the sake of achieving political aims and goals and negotiations. And they became expert in that, especially when they see the United States respond to the proxies, not respond to them. So yes, it's a kind of a side wars from the nuclear program. But let's keep in mind, as much as the nuclear program is dangerous, and that's one of the biggest problem with the JOP, what they call it, JOP, I forget the name of it.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, whatever. Okay. The problem with it, it addresses the nuclear issue, but it doesn't address something as dangerous as the nuclear bomb, terrorism by Tehran. Ballistic missiles, strategic ballistic missiles. If you cannot reach a deal about nuclear deal and allow Iran to practice terrorism freely against Israel and Saudi Arabia and the region and against the United States, that's not an achievement by all means. And the Iranians, they don't mind even to stop their nuclear program if they continue their terrorism and power. It's the first, people have to understand, Iran, in the first time in history of the Iran, since the ancient Iran, they have now an arm on the Mediterranean, extends all the way to the Mediterranean. That never happened in history, in the history of Iran. Now, Hezbollah is basically a fighting force. Israel respond to Hezbollah. Israel is too small to respond to Iran. But someone has to deal with Iran. Arabs are afraid of Iran. The Arab Gulf Arab. They don't fight. They have their F-16 sitting in warehouses, rotting, okay? So somebody has to respond to Iran. And I guarantee you, and the killing of Qasem Soleimani, there's no better example than it. After the killing of Qasem Soleimani, things became so very quiet for a while. So again, the more you give them lax on their sanctions, the more you don't punish them, they're going to punish us through their proxies.
So this leads to the question of how the United States responds to the Houthi war in the Red Sea. And it seems to me, and it sounds like it seems to you as well, that if we only respond to Houthi assets, we're missing the point. And the point is that this is all directed by Iran. And if you don't go to the source of the problem, you won't solve the problem. Is that reasonable?
The same thing applies to US. My heart goes to the US servicemen and women in Iraq who are like sitting ducks waiting for the next attack. And we pray for God, no one of them is going to be killed or injured. By the way, my nephew was a US soldier in Iraq, and he was kidnapped and killed by one of those militias. So I know the pain and horror, and I know how vicious those people are. So we have US servicemen. They have, imagine, have you heard of any army, let alone the US Army, have no air defense to defend themselves? They left without air defense because air defense may maybe upset Iran or make them not go to the negotiation table. It's unbelievable. We are just sitting praying for God. Next drone was not going to kill one of them. And if someone injured, the news would say he was lightly injured, not very hardly injured. And if he was killed, but he was killed by heart attack before the attack. I mean, it's unbelievable. So this is what we have now. The same thing for the Houthis. They are intercepting their attacks on international trade, not only the United States, on international sea lines, not only Israel. And you have US intercepting, and when they cannot intercept one rocket or two, it will kill some people, it will sink some ships. This is unbelievable. You cannot, I mean, you wonder why Iran flexing their muscles when they see this weakness.
Agreed. Now, we've come to pretty much the end of our program, and I thank you for a really important look at something that I believe Americans do not pay attention to. First of all, the tentacles of Iran in the region, and secondly, the American response or lack of response. The people that watch this program know that I like to end on a positive note. So I have to find a question. You haven't been very positive, actually, but I have to find a question for you, the answer to which will make us feel better as we leave the program. So I was looking for a positive answer question. And the one that I can think of is it possible that Iraq can overcome this? That there is something about the Iraqi people and what they've learned and what they've been through. And I would say this is also a question about the Lebanese people who live under the heel of the boot of Hezbollah, or the Palestinian people who live under Hamas. Is there any thought that the people can rise up and make it work? Or is it dependent on the United States? And if it is dependent on the United States, is there any hope that will come through for the people?
Well, I think, first of all, we have to support the United States. First priority is to invest and support the small oases of freedom and alliance with the United States, like Israel and Kurdistan. That's extremely important. That would be a good start. That would be a very important start. Give them top priority, give them weapons. You're not going to believe it. The US government supports the Iraqi army with weapons and support the Kurdish Peshmerga with weapons. But guess what? The United States sent the Kurdish Peshmerga weapons to Baghdad to give it to the Kurds. Baghdad keep it. It's like sending weapons to Hamas to be given to Israel. Okay? So this is the kind of thinking we have to change it. We have very small oases of support to the United States. These OSs are sound, are strong, and people and government loves the United States, not only the government. We have to support them unconditionally so they can stand up for themselves. And then we take everything second. If I can guarantee you, if Kurdistan, Iraq thrives, there is more hope Iraq will thrive. The hope of Iraq successes hangs on the success of Kurdistan, Iraq. And that's exactly what the opposite the United States government is doing. I'm not pessimistic, but taking the consideration of the current policy of the current administration, you cannot be optimistic because they are weakening the Kurds, they're strangling the Kurds, while they are the only allies. And you can see even the support to Israel, thanks God, it was to some degree good, but not to the level that we wish it should be. There much more can be done because Israel cannot lose this war. Because this, as I tell people, the war in Gaza is not about Gaza. The war in Gaza is about Iran. And we have to think of this wider image of how to deal with the problem and solve it. It's not we don't like what Israel is doing or we like what the Kurds is doing. It's what is the interest of the United States and where does it stand? What resources we have? The available resources we have is we have the Kurds, we have the Israelis, we have the Saudis. Let's support them. Let's make them stand up to Iran instead of undermining them.
I'm going to take that as a fairly positive answer because I want to. So we do have allies, we do have friends, we do have capabilities. Now what we need to do is figure out how to get the American people, to get the American government to pay attention.
Exactly.
And I think I'm going to stop there because that's as optimistic as we're going to get. Entifadh Qanbar, that was a really important program that you did for us. I appreciate it. I learned things. I know the people that are listening have learned things. And I think we understand what we have to do. So thank you.
Thank you.